we have been really fortunate to be the recipient of extraordinary investment from Bloomberg Philanthropies and a whole host of issues, but predominantly in closing the racial wealth gap in Cincinnati and using data in order to do it. We partnered with Bloomberg to study a year-long study of the barriers to wealth generation amongst Cincinnatians, specifically black Cincinnatians, and that year-long process resulted in recommendations on how to mitigate the damage and also improve wealth generation in specifically our black and historically black neighborhoods. And the data is very, very clear that if you invest dollars into programs that put money into the hands of people who need it most, the results are transformative. And so with Bloomberg, we were able to pass baby bonds for all of our preschool students going through our Preschool Promise program. They will get savings accounts that will follow them over the next 3 years because 60% of kids who have access to a savings account go to college. We're spending $1.3 million to wipe out medical debt for 30,000 residents because medical debt is the biggest barrier for wealth generation amongst our black citizens. And finally, we have seeded a universal basic income program. During the pandemic, the federal government's injection of cash into low-income communities showed huge benefits, and so we're trying to prolong those ARP dollars with our own local program.
Well, that was quite a list. It's a lot different than the lists I hear in Washington, and that's been a theme, and I suspect will be throughout the broadcast here. But what do you make of what's happening in town right now? The story is that we can't get along, we can't get anything done. Congress is literally on hold right now without a speaker. And we're dealing with some very pressing issues at a clearly urgent time here for our democracy, for funding our government. Does that have a spillover effect into cities like yours?
Of course it has a spillover effect. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, President Biden's ARP program, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, these are having profound impacts. Federal government legislation, federal action is having profound impacts on our local economy, on our public safety, on our housing issues, on climate. And without those federal dollars, without that leadership, we just don't have the resources necessary to fight back against these macroeconomic problems. So what you see in D.C. is the opposite of what you'll see in major American cities. It is impossible for a mayor not to be pragmatic. It is impossible for a mayor to be extreme because we are so proximate to our citizens and so proximate to the issues. No one cares if I'm spinning or obfuscating. People expect a mayor to be the moral voice of their city, to take clear, specific stands on hard issues, and most importantly, lead. And that's what we are seeing across the country, specifically in Cincinnati on racial wealth gap inequalities. And that's what we need to see more of in Washington, D.C.
Do you have a partner in the Biden administration?
We do. I'm very close with the Biden administration. Cincinnati recently got the single largest federal grant in our country's history, $1.6 billion to redo the Brent Spence Bridge, which is critically important to Cincinnati, but also critically important to interstate commerce. 3% of our GDP goes over that bridge. We're using the bipartisan infrastructure dollars to reconnect historically black communities that were destroyed by the highway development in the 50s and 60s. The CHIPS Act paved the way for Intel to make a $200 billion investment in Central Ohio, the largest semiconductor plant in our country, and we will see a massive supply chain impact in Cincinnati based on that investment. So across the board, we are seeing real impacts in Cincinnati for what's going on in D.C.
We have a new poll out today, Bloomberg and Morning Consult, that really makes clear the importance to which the economy is going to factor into this election cycle coming up here. We talk about a lot of different issues around this campaign, from reproductive rights to student loans, but the economy clearly rises to the top. I wonder if you see and feel that, and what the concerns are from people who live in Cincinnati. We talk about inflation, and in the abstract, what does it mean for people in your city?
It's a real challenge. The macroeconomic factors, inflation, interest rates being so high, insurance rates being so high, construction costs being so high, it's very, very hard to get anything out of the ground right now.
Does that end up being a problem for Democrats?
I don't think so, no, because the Biden administration has passed legislation to address those issues, and by passing those pieces of legislation, Cincinnati, just our example, is seeing huge benefits from our local economy to even things like public safety. President Biden's leadership getting ARP dollars into cities literally saved Cincinnati. We would not have been able to afford to exist as a city without those ARP dollars, and so much of the negative rhetoric around police funding happening in Washington, D.C. has nothing to do with the lived reality in Cincinnati. In fact, it's President Biden and Democratic mayors across the city that are actually funding public safety.